just got out of theaters from seeing The Silence of the Lambs on the big screen for its 35th anniversary, and there's a lot to discuss when it comes to this film because this is one of the greatest films of all time. So with that being said, guys, let's go ahead and get into this movie review. Let's go. The Silence of the Lambs is a 1991 psychological horror thriller directed by Jonathan Demme, and inside of this film we see Jodie Foster stars as Clarice Starling, a top student at the FBI's training academy. Jack Crawford wants Clarice to interview Dr. Hannibal Lector, a brilliant psychiatrist who is also a violent psychopath serving life behind bars for various acts of murder and cannibalism. Crawford believes that Lector may have insight into a case that Starling, as an attractive young woman, may be just the bait to draw him out. Now with that being said, let's go ahead and start off with the fact that this is one of only 3 films in history to win 5 Academy Awards for Best Picture, Director, Actor, Actress, and Adapted Screenplay, and is widely known as one of the best horror films of all time, and that is for very good reason. Now the way I like to begin my reviews is starting with the positives, and this movie has a whole lot of them. So let's go ahead and get into my positives for The Silence of the Lambs. For my first positive with this film, we have to talk about Anthony Hopkins in his legendary role as Dr. Hannibal Lecter, and I love the introduction into this character and the portrayal and performance from Hopkins throughout this entire film, because it is one of the creepiest characters of all time without you really even getting to see a whole lot out of him, because his appearance in this film is famously brief. He's only on screen from 16 to 25 minutes, which is extremely short considering that this is a 2-hour film, and his character sticks in your brain so heavily by the time you're done watching it that he almost feels like his presence is constantly there and like he had a lot more screen time, but no. Only 16 to 25 minutes, which is extremely surprising, and that just goes to show how strong this character is inside of this film from the very moment you meet him, with Clarice Starling walking down those corridors, getting lower and lower and lower into that facility, into that insane asylum, and once she gets to that final row of cells with her chair sitting at the very end, and she goes over to the glass display with Dr. Hannibal Lecter just waiting there for her with the creepiest of facial expressions, and from then on out, these characters play a game of quid pro quo, where essentially Clarice is going to ask him for some information for help with her case of Buffalo Bill. We'll talk about that character in just a second, and then in return, Hannibal Lecter wants to know more about Clarice's personal life, and from then on we get into the psychological elements of this film, where he begins to psychoanalyze this character of Clarice Starling, try and pull any personal events and traumas from her life out of her so that he can just toy and play with her, as he does with everyone he comes across inside of this movie. Now, psychological thrillers have always been my favorite genre of film, so when it comes to this character, he is just adding so much to that side of this film, and I love every second of his performance. Okay, it's one of the greatest performances of all time, not just when it comes to Anthony Hopkins. Okay, because to get into another positive here, there is another character that we have to address, and that is Jodie Foster playing Clarice Starling, and one of the best protagonists of all time, especially for a female character, and especially for its time, because if you know anything about 91, there wasn't a ton of female leads at this time, so in a way this film is revolutionary, and also you get to see a lot of the world through Clarice Starling's eyes, and I love that inside of this movie, because every single social interaction that she has throughout this film with her male counterparts, you get to see the way she is sort of ostracized simply for being a woman entering into a man's field, that being the field of the FBI. Now, constantly throughout this film, she is being sexually sought after, she is being flirted with as she's just trying to do her job, just trying to participate in her profession, and she gets so many weird interactions constantly, so many people eyeing her for different reasons, and so many different ulterior motives out of the different characters that she interacts with. So that part there is just brilliant. It's also very ahead of its time, and it's not force-fed to the audience. It's done in a way that is genuine and that is believable, and I love what the film did with that aspect of her character. But not just that, okay, because Jodie Foster is playing Clarice Starling, who is a beginner. She is a trainee. she is not, you know, an official FBI agent by the time we see her inside of this film. And so at the same time, while it's the audience's first time in these scenarios, it's also Clarice Starling's first time in a lot of these scenarios and trying to navigate them. Just seeing her willingness to get this case solved of Buffalo Bill, I think it's great, man. I love this character. I love both of these characters. They do such an amazing job. And after watching this film, you could see exactly why they won the awards that they did for their performances. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the antagonist inside of this film, the main antagonist, because while Dr. Hannibal Lecter is kind of our main villain in a way, he's also just a helper on the Buffalo Bill case, because Buffalo Bill is not incarcerated yet. He's still active, he's still out in the field, and that is our main serial killer that we are chasing throughout this movie. And the performance here is great because Buffalo Bill is a certified weirdo throughout this entire film. The way he kind of stalks and preys on his victims, it's very similar to like a Ted Bundy and the things that we've heard about Ted Bundy and his stories when it comes to the way he used to capture his victims. We get something similar to that here with the character of Buffalo Bill, where we see him trying to wear a cast on his arm like he has a broken arm. That's something that Ted Bundy has done in the past, and he's trying to fit a couch into his car, and of course ends up trapping his main victim that we see trying to be saved throughout this movie. Now, what I also love when it comes to this character is his lair, because he has this little evil lair like he's some super villain, and he kind of is inside of this film, and it's creepy as hell. He seemingly lives in a regular house, which we really don't see until the end of this movie, but you get to see a lot of his underground lair throughout this film. It's like this basement that just spans out to more and more rooms, and is almost like this labyrinth to get lost in as you're watching this film. You know, from the room that he has where he has all of these creepy ass mannequins put up with all of his different outfits displayed, over into like this well that he likes to keep his victims in, and then into his performance and everything we find out about this character, how he thinks that he is a transvestite. All right, there's no easy way to say it. That's what this movie says. That's what he's called. He thinks that he is that, but he really isn't that. It's all sort of inside of his sick, twisted mind. And so a lot of why he does what he does is because he is trying to go through his own evolution process. And that's sort of what we see going on with the way he kills his victims by skinning his victims. And then we also see him trying to make this skin suit. Thank God we don't get to see too much of that throughout this film, because that would have been disturbing on its own. But also, he happens to leave a moth in a cocoon inside of his victim's mouth. And why the moth, right? We're wondering why this is. Well, the thing that this movie gives you is the moth represents change. It represents evolution, and sort of in a way, it represents the Buffalo Bill character. And I think that is just brilliant writing, because just like the moth in the cocoon that is eventually going to become something beautiful, so is Buffalo Bill, at least inside of his own, like I said, sick and twisted mind. Now, I think he makes for the perfect antagonist throughout this film. Now, let's move on to another positive that I have with this movie, and that would be the soundtrack, okay? And this is probably something in the movie that is a bit underrated and a bit under talked about, and that is exactly why we are going to discuss it, because the soundtrack here is creepy as hell. It adds to the suspense in every single scene and is just building up the unsettling creep factor throughout this entire movie. The soundtrack is amazing. Every single scene is elevated. Without this soundtrack here, this movie would be nowhere near as creepy as it is. It builds all of the suspense. It builds to the ambiance for each and every scene that we see here, and just creates that effect of a psychological horror thriller, which is exactly what this film is trying to achieve here, and I think it does a great job at it. So we had to mention the soundtrack. Okay, now moving on to my next positive with this movie, and that's the supporting cast here, because I think Dr. Chilton and Jack Crawford do such an amazing job at adding to the success of this film and letting this film play out. Okay, not only do they give amazing performances, but all of the little individual things that are going on with their characters. For instance, Dr. Chilton, this is of course the head guy at the facility that is housing Hannibal Lecter. You could see that he sort of has this need for power and for fame, and he constantly is displaying that in his interactions with Dr. Hannibal Lecter. He likes to constantly torment him, talk down to him, belittle him. You know, he sort of thinks he has control over him, and he loves that he has control over him in a way. So much so that when Clarice Starling says, hey, listen, I just want to talk to Hannibal Lecter by myself. Thanks for bringing me down here. He's like, well, why did I come down here with you in the first place? He's sort of taken aback by that and feels disrespected that you would even want to interact with Hannibal Lecter without him being there and him being involved in some sort of way. And he is just this pompous, arrogant douchebag throughout this entire film, so much so that when Clarice and Jack Crawford set up a little plan to get more information out of Dr. Hannibal Lecter by offering him a fake deal, we see that Dr. Chilton has planted bugs inside of Hannibal Lecter's room, and he's listening in on their conversation. And then once Clarice leaves, he ends up offering his own deal to have him actually transported to a different facility in exchange for the information that Clarice is trying to get here. And it's just such like a scumbag move that this character does. Now, gladly, at the end of this film, we get to see him pay for all of this nonsense that he does, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But let's move over into Jack Crawford, because I love this character too. Okay, I love the performance here. I love what he adds to this film, how he vouches for Clarice constantly and wants to see her succeed, yet at the end of the day, it is a woman entering a man's field, so he has his own slights with her. All right, and you can see that in their very first interaction inside of this movie, where they mention that they've met before in the past. Apparently she's done some tests under him, and he says, oh yeah, I liked you so much that I gave you an A, and she says, A-, sir. You gave me an A-, kind of seeing that power play between these two characters also. And you can even see him make mistakes when it comes to his interactions involving Clarice. For instance, when they go off to another jurisdiction to want to look at the body of one of Buffalo Bill's victims, he ends up telling the head chief there, hey, do you think we could talk, you know, one-on-one so that we don't address the sexual nature of these crimes in front of Clarice Starling, pretty much outcasting her in front of an entire precinct of officers, making her the black sheep in this certain scenario, which again adds to that point that I mentioned earlier with her being a woman in a man's field, and sort of her just getting treated differently simply for existing inside of that world. Now, this is another one of those scenes here, and I love how they comment on it later. He says, listen, Clarice, I was just blowing smoke for them so that we can end up seeing the body without them being too involved. And she tells him, hey, listen, when you interact with me a certain way, it tells everyone else around that that is an acceptable way to interact with me, and that it matters. When you make little slice like that, it matters. And he understands that at the end of the day, and he sort of checks his behavior there. I love those little scenes there. There's so many gems inside of this movie now. What I really love about the Jack Crawford character is that at the end of the day, he is an honorable man, and he ends up showing that by coming to Clarice Starling's official introduction into the FBI. You know, he just happens to pop in and pop out. He says events like this aren't really for him, but he still wanted to show his love and respect for his prospect. So I thought that was very sweet there out of that character, and kind of just showed who he is at his heart. And then we get an amazing scene where, of course, he leaves that phone call, and all right, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about the finale. He leaves that phone call. He says, listen, don't forget you have a phone call, Clarice. And she goes over there to that phone and picks it up, and it is none other than Hannibal Lecter on the other line. Now, this is, of course, after we get one of the greatest scenes in this entire film. And this will sort of be the last point I make here in the positive section, okay? Because I could talk about this film all day long. But let's get into this final point that I want to make. So I want to talk about the scene where we discover why this movie is called Silence of the Lambs, because it is one of the best scenes in the entire film. So we go to the final interaction in person between Clarice and Dr. Hannibal Lecter, and he is very upset that Clarice and Jack Crawford lied to him about the deal. And he goes, oh, did you add that little touch there about Anthrax Island? And she goes, yeah, that was my touch. And he goes, ooh, that was a very nice one. I like that one, in a very snarky way, feeling like, you know, he thought they had a connection between each other, and she clearly betrayed that. But at the end of the day, for whatever reason, he still has a love and a respect for Clarice Starling. And we get that last scene where he says, listen, everything you need here is in these case files to find Buffalo Bill. I guarantee you could do it. But before we do, you know, let's play this quid pro quo one more time. You tell me something, I tell you something back. And he gets that final story out of Clarice about her childhood, her father passing away and her going to stay on that ranch where she heard that they were slaughtering the lambs for that season. And of course, she went out to that barn trying to save one, ran as far as she could away from that barn with the sheep in her hands, ends up getting picked up by the police, and then she never ends up seeing that land again because, of course, the farm owner was extremely upset with Clarice Starling. And that is where we get the name and the meaning for this film, The Silence of the Lambs. And it's just brilliant storytelling here, guys. The writing here is so sharp. It's some of the best writing, one of the best screenplays ever put to screen. And I love this scene, but I almost love what comes after it next even more, because we see Hannibal Lecter make his escape, his brilliant escape from this facility, where we see him steal the pen and make it into a makeshift handcuff key, of course releasing his handcuffs once it's time for his feeding throughout the day, and he brutally slaughters these two officers that are watching over him. He performs surgery on one of their corpses, steals the face, and then we find him waking up inside of that ambulance, takes off the mask, off the face mask. One of the creepiest, one of the best twists ever inside of a psychological horror film. I love this film so much, guys. I really do. We had to talk about it at some point throughout this video, but let's discuss the final scene, okay? It's time to talk about the phone call between Clarice and Dr. Hannibal Lecter for one last time. All right, she's inducted into the FBI. She's an official member. Crawford tells her, hey, don't forget your phone call. And when she picks up that phone, it's none other than Dr. Hannibal Lecter. And he's just having, you know, a one-on-one with her. Says, listen, don't come try to find me. I'm not going to come try to find you. You don't have to worry about that. But I'm going to be having an old friend for dinner. Click, he hangs up. And then we see him in this ridiculous outfit, ridiculous disguise, and ridiculous wig. And he is just casually walking as he follows none other than Dr. Chilton off the plane, who he, of course, is going to be having for dinner that night. Hannibal the Cannibal is back in full effect. And we get a great scene. I love the final shot of this film. It's one of the greatest shots ever, where they just leave an open camera just sitting there, a still shot of people casually walking, and you see Dr. Hannibal Lecter in his disguise walking after Dr. Chilton, and they both just get lost in this frame. They just goes further and further. They get lost in this crowd of people. You see them no longer, and it just leaves on a still shot of a crowd of people walking, and Dr. Hannibal Lecter is now in the wind. He's now lost, off doing his thing once again. And this is just a brilliant film, guys. From beginning to end, this is one of the best films of all time. Let's move over into my overall review for The Silence of the Lambs. Now look, guys, normally I have a negative section in my reviews because majority of the time, films do have 1 or 2 points at the very least that you could point out and say, this is where they could have done something better. All right, this is a con inside this movie, but not this film. I love this film, start to finish. It's one of the best written films of all time, one of the best directed films of all time, one of the best screenplays of all time, with some of the best performances of all time, undoubtedly. And this is my favorite genre of film of all time, that being psychological thriller, and it does that genre at the highest level here, builds so much suspense constantly, plays with the audience's mind constantly, and of course we get that amazing twist with Hannibal Lecter escaping, almost fooling the audience in a sense if you haven't seen the film already. And I've seen the film plenty of times before I went to see it in theaters for this 35th anniversary, but once I seen the announcement that this is going to be in theaters again, I just knew I had to go out and see this. I couldn't miss my chance seeing this on the big screen, considering I wasn't even alive yet when this was aired for the very first time in theaters. So the 35th anniversary for Silence of the Lambs, I couldn't be more honored that I got to see this film on the big screen. I'm so happy that we finally got a chance to discuss and talk about this movie on the channel. With that being said, guys, if I had to rate The Silence of the Lambs, I would give this film a 10 out of 10. It gets the 10 out of 10, the masterclass rating. This is a masterclass in filmmaking. This is a film that I will go back to until the end of time to constantly rewatch over and over, and every single time I pick out slight little elements out of it that I didn't notice the last time I watched it. And man, I had a great time talking about this. I'm curious to know your thoughts about this film down in the comment section down below. If you don't know what I do here on Demigod ENT, we do film, TV, and pop culture based content. If you're interested in this type of content, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe, hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. I'll catch you in the next one, guys. Peace.